Madam Chairman, thank you, Director Carter. So, moving along, the next item for the Wildlife Committee is Dave McKinney from the Chief of Environmental Services to discuss White Oak WMA.
Good morning. My name is David McKinney. I'm the Chief of your Division of Environmental Services. And in Knoxville, several commission meetings ago, an issue came up about one of our wildlife management areas in Region 1. And we wanted to take the opportunity today to get everyone on the same page. A lot of people have put a tremendous amount of thought into this already, members of the commission, members of our Region 1 staff, and Jim Hamilton's here. Really appreciate his efforts. And our neighbors for the WMA, the gentlemen who farm around the White Oak management area. Can somebody get this thing started for me up here? Not you, Doug. Not you, Doug. So I'll just forward this through the arrows here. Apologize for the delay. Had I been doing this, we would still be waiting, so. Go back one. The White Oak WMA is in the northwestern portion of Hardin County. So it's on the west side of the Big Bend in the Tennessee River north of Savannah. The agency purchased this property in the mid-'80s. And you can see from, and by the way, if you are anything like me, I'm a note taker and doodler. And so I have hard copies of all of these maps. If anyone wants them, since this is an issue that we may be pondering for some time, please. I don't mean to clutter your desk. If you saw my office, I've been accused of cluttering before. So if you'll look at the map here, you'll see the area in blue through which these canals run denote the floodplain as mapped by the Natural Resource Conservation Service, NRCS. So you can see that where the WMA is, as outlined in red, is in a depression that sits between the major drainage areas and flows to the east toward the Tennessee River. The drainage area of the White Oak Creek watershed is about 190 square miles. So it's pretty good drainage area. You'll note that what are denoted as streams here are straight lines. The effort to provide drainage to this area to facilitate agriculture started in the 1920s and has carried on at various times up until recently, not wholesale channelization, but attempts to remove blockages and facilitate flow. But you can see that this basin, this lowland that sits between the Tennessee River and the upland drainage is at the convergence of half a dozen major streams. Coming in from the north, you'll see Middleton Creek and Hurricane Creek, and from the south, Mud Creek, which picks up a tributary known as Salt Creek or Salt River, and also Crooked Creek. Up until, about the early 1960s, there were no real environmental regulatory aspects to these big drainage projects. And so the history of these things is important because a lot of things were started and maintained while regulatory authority was being promulgated in both the state and the federal level. Currently, there are regulatory issues when it comes to drainage and hydrology and moving water and affecting wetlands that are spread over a half a dozen federal agencies. EPA, the Natural Resource Environmental Protection Agency. We've been cautioned about acronyms, so be careful here. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers plays a major role in what can be done in wetlands and streams. To some extent, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. On the state level, it's primarily the Tennessee Department of Environment and Conservation. You can see from here that this basin can flood in three different ways. One is if you get enough rainfall in the upper basins, these 3 or 4 or 5 main tributaries to the basin, they can put enough water in that basin to cause flooding both in the WMA and on adjacent lands, adjacent agricultural lands. Also, when the Tennessee River floods sufficiently to back water up into this basin, it can flood this whole area. And the floodplain is where this is going to occur on some recurring basis, but depending on the size of the flood, it could be more or less. And then the worst case is when those two things happen at the same time. You get backwater from the Tennessee River, you get sustained rains in the headwater. So the agency came to this issue kind of late in the game, the mid-1980s, and bought some property here mainly for waterfowl management purposes, and have added a few properties up into the 1990s in an attempt to have a more manageable area and to alleviate flooding problems with some of the neighbors who were having the biggest problems. The agency's budget for this is about $50,000 a year in equipment and supplies. So this plus special projects after floods, the agency probably has something shy of $2 million invested in trying to move water through the White Oak area. This is a picture of a breach in one of the levees. This is White Oak proper, and the main part of this slide is to show you that when these bottom lands flood and these soils become saturated, it's a very difficult environment to do anything in until the flood waters recede. And that is the big issue here, is the pace at which flood waters recede after the Tennessee River goes down low enough to allow that to happen. So the times of year when you can get in here with equipment are somewhat limited. The piece of equipment that functions best in here is called an aquatic track hoe. The agency does not have one. We have access to this through our friend David Salyers, who will be speaking to you about a proposal that the Basin Authority wants to present to you. We figured for about a week of this, of renting a track hoe and an operator, you're looking at somewhere in the neighborhood of $5,000 to $7,000, depending on the time of the year and the demand. And I hesitate to throw that number out there with professional excavators on the commission. Feel free to tell me if I'm way off base there, Commissioner. So you can see this little cluster of duck blinds, and this is the reason the agency got into management of this property in the first place. It does provide outstanding waterfowl hunting. The yellow lands denote our neighbors who are farming in very, very fertile and productive areas, and anything that happens with regard to movement of water through this basin affects them in really significant ways. So the agency, you have a couple of things to consider here. In any environmental impact statement or any time you propose projects, the first thing you have to look at is the no action alternative. And here that would mean no significant action as far as trying to move water through this area. That is not something that is reasonable to consider, we believe. There's just too much at stake here. There's too long a history of trying to work with, at least long history for the agency is since '85. And so what the agency would propose for you to consider is to keep doing what we're doing. And we spend a fair amount of time and effort and work with manual labor, with equipment, with explosives, trying to keep water moving through White Oak. The other is to enhance the budget for the White Oak WMA to provide more access to amphibious track hoe and someone who is skilled in operating one. Keep in mind that even though it's called an amphibious track hoe, it is most productive when it's working in the driest possible conditions. So I'd like to now ask David Salyers, who's with the Basin Authority, to come and pick up this topic and visit with you about a proposal that the Basin Authority has put together. Keep in mind that in supporting David's proposal, the agency, the farming community, the Basin Authority, we would collectively need to work on acquiring funding through the General Assembly to do it. Because it is a significant step up from what the agency can contribute here. So with that, I'd like to introduce David, and following David's presentation, we want to give our neighbors who are involved in agriculture as much time as they desire to visit with you and perhaps answer your questions.
David, if you don't mind, I think we have a few questions as well, and I'll ask the first one. Before the agency purchased this property in the '80s, what was how often was just the normal spring flooding? How big of an issue was that before we got there?
Well, I don't have an answer for you based on the knowledge of the frequency of flooding. I would assume that since the ditching and draining and the major canal work started back in the 20s, that it is an issue that has a long history here. If you would like, I can work with USGS and we can bring you specifically how often this area has flooded and over whatever period you're interested in. Would you?
Great. Yeah, we can
Okay.
talk about that and see if Commissioner Cox, I think you had a question?
Yeah, you kind of, unless I missed it, you didn't exactly say what is causing the problem and exactly where. The channelization, the straight line streams carry water down to the point that the channelization ended. And there's something similar to that at Wolf River WMA that comes out of Mississippi that was done the same way, and it braids and floods, like, as you know. Is the pinch point there? Is it beaver dams? Is it logs? Is it siltation? What's the problem?
It is.
Exactly.
Commissioner, it is all of the above. You can see in this basin that depending on how the flooding occurs and the duration, and then also depending on the rate at which water exits the basin. If the Tennessee River drops quickly and the river waters drain off quickly, they leave debris, silt, flood in sometimes odd places. So it is a constant struggle to deal with blockages in both the old channel and the river, a constant struggle where there are breaks in the berms and levees that have been thrown up over the years. If there were one place that we could work on and keep water moving, I'm not sure we would be having this discussion. But because after every flood, it's different.
What does it look like? I guess the top is north. What does it look like east of the WMA when it gets off of our property? Is that gonna, if ours was cleaned up and exited the property, what's gonna happen off of our property?
Well, I think that is part of what David wants to
Okay.
visit with you about. Also, there are a couple of, there is at least one major highway you'll see that runs north-south, and anytime you have culverts and bridges, you have pinch points depending on how much debris is moving.
Okay,
in the river.
and I believe it's Black Swamp, I believe, that was channelized and drained an area that was the subject of a long lawsuit. They broke the levees and tried to return the water back to the original flow. So that long channelization that goes is returning it back to the original historical stream bed or however it was drained. Is that not where when the water backs up, it backs up over a larger area than being held in a flume ditch that all runs out into one spot?
Well, the concept of restoring natural hydrology is one that is kind of the holy grail of all stream restoration projects. Here, that's more problematic because of the way silt and debris and logs and whatnot are deposited post-flood events. And so, in theory, if you wanted to restore natural hydrology, what you would do is let nature take its course, fill in the ditches where it wanted to, break the levees where it wanted to, and it would eventually establish meandering channels through here. The problem with that is that agriculture from our neighbors would become extremely difficult, if not impossible. So we're trying to find a middle ground here.
So it wouldn't hold more water if it was a meandering stream than it would be if it was a straight line stream.
The problem is not at base flow or even at bank full flow. The problem is when this basin fills up with water.
All right, so siltation is part of the problem.
NRCS does a fairly sophisticated job of quantifying erosion from agricultural sites. And it's how they target and prioritize their work on trying to stabilize streams and to prevent erosion, work with landowners. The erosion rates on these lands are fairly low comparatively across West Tennessee. So yes, there is silt moving, there is silt deposited, but it's nothing like the erosion rates that you saw from West Tennessee ag lands in the 1960s.
Well, my understanding is even if this was channelized and it was cleaned out, then in 5 or 6 years, it'd be silted in again. Right or wrong?
A combination of silt and debris and all of the stuff that comes with the floods. I think that's fair to say. These drainways will require constant maintenance to keep water moving.
So what can be done if this is a cure, whoever pays for it, what's going to prevent it from happening again? What else, what's the cure upstream to stop this?
Well, there is, in simple terms, there is no cure. I mean, this basin, with almost certainty, will flood again, will flood multiple times over our lifetimes and into the future. I think that is a certainty. And whatever is done here to keep water moving through this basin will require continual maintenance.
Did the channelization of the streams cause this issue?
Ooh, cause may go too far. They definitely contributed to it. When they channelized these streams back in the 20s and the 30s and the 40s and kept adding to it, the nature in which that took place causes water to move at a very high velocity. And you see that these soils here are kind of like sugar when they're wet. And so, yes, there would have been, I think it's fair to speculate that there would have been high rates of erosion as a result of the channelization.
Are the places that are farmed historically farmed for the last 70 or 80 years?
I would assume so. We have a whole front row of gentlemen here who can answer those questions much better than I could.
Okay, I'll hush a minute.
And we want to give them ample time.
We want to hear from you, but let's go through, thank you. Do any other committee members have a question or comment? How about, any commission members have a question or comment? Thank you, David.
And if I could, I'd like to turn this over to David Salyers. David is the head of the West Tennessee Basin Authority. They work for a commission. It's a state commission. We have worked with David for years. He is an outstanding stream restoration ecologist, hydrologist, and look forward to working with him on this issue. So, David,